Hello and welcome friends to today's demonstration where I will be showing you how I painted this beautiful winter lakeside scene. To begin with, I outlined a few key details using masking fluid. You can see these lovely spindly trees on the left, a few rocky details in the foreground and a little bit of foliage. I used Pebeo drawing gum for this, but of course you can use whichever drawing gum or masking fluid you like best. I used a flat brush for most of this. I find the sort of chiseled flat edge is really good for doing lines like this. I also find that it works really well to keep your own sort of set of brushes for drawing gum or masking fluid if you use it a lot. The only pencil lines you can see here are just one line about 2/3 of the way up for the horizon, and then I just quickly penciled in a rough outline of the lake shore as well. I'm not a huge fan of having a lot of pencil lines in my finished drawings. You know, watercolour, it can be quite translucent, so often lines show through, and sometimes that's a good thing. But not today, so I decided to do my outlines in masking fluid, which just leaves clean white lines which I can then go in and fill in later, and also can work into the detail of the rest of the painting, such as these trees. I've filled them all in because they're going to be a pair of beautiful silver birches, and of course we want that lovely bright white to show through. So I'm beginning today with a little raw sienna that I just want to put at this horizon line, putting it into the sky there, just a little glow of the sun rising or setting. I'll let you be the judge of this painting, whether it's a sunset or a sunrise. Either way, I just wanted that lovely faint golden glow on the horizon here. And now I'm coming in with a little bit of ultramarine blue and just sweeping it in from the sides and the corners here to mix and mingle with the raw sienna, being quite careful with my brush strokes. I don't want to sort of muddy it together and make green, but I do want to blend them quite nicely. So you can see I'm just sweeping the colour here and allowing it to diffuse. You saw before that I already wet this top third of the paper. That's just with clean water, which just allows me to put these colours on and for them to blend a lot more easily than if I'd put them straight onto dry paper. You can see I'm just pulling the colour in, I'm just going from the outside, working my way around. I'm leaving a little bit of white space here and there just to signify some clouds, and just working that colour in until I'm happy with the richness and the shade of blue here. And now, just to emphasize that cloud coming in there from the left side, I'm using a piece of folded tissue and just gently using it to pull out a little bit of paint. You can see it's leaving these lovely white marks, which are just going to be the hints of little wisps of cloud coming in from the outside of the painting, just into that blue there. And now, whilst the sky is still wet, I'm using my flat edge of my flat brush here. This is a Princeton Neptune modeler brush. It's got this lovely flat chiseled edge, which I'm using to pop some distant trees and distant foliage into the horizon. You can see I'm just going along that line and just putting in a few careful little lines and strokes upwards there. This is Payne's Grey that I'm using, and I just really want it to start blending beautifully into the wet sky, so you get that lovely soft, almost hazy outline that you often get looking, a long distance away, say across a lake. You see the distant foliage almost disappearing mistily into the horizon. That's the sort of effect I want to achieve today. So I'm alternating Payne's grey and a little bit of burnt sienna, that lovely vibrant bright autumnal orange colour that I love so much. I really like introducing burnt sienna into these cooler sort of colours because it just looks so bright and vibrant. I've switched to a round brush here. You'll see me switching between the two of them just because I want a little bit of detail here rather than just a stroke or a simple line. You can see I'm pulling this burnt sienna up into a hint of a lovely tree shape here, and I'm going to let that diffuse into the sky as well so it's nice and soft. There we go, you can see I've just gone along and alternated the darker colour, the Payne's grey, with these lovely little pops of burnt sienna just to get the key details in place. And now you can see I'm just going along that edge and emphasising the colour, popping a little bit more paint in here and there where it needs it to alternate between these lovely sort of rich dark marks and the softness of the diffusion that's already happened. If you look there at that gap between land and sky, you can see this foliage has already started to diffuse and soften up beautifully. My advice for doing this would be to work relatively quickly. Obviously you don't want to rush it and make a mistake, but it is important to get this detail in whilst the paper is still lovely and wet. I'm using Saunders Waterford cold pressed paper today. It's 100% cotton paper, so it holds water really well without getting too messy or buckling up too much and being difficult, which is why I'm able to keep adding in little details here before it dries out. So now I'm really happy with the diffusion on those distant bits of foliage. I've gone and dried the sky. I've used just an ordinary hairdryer on a low heat, dried it all out so that it's safe to lean my hand on without smearing and smudging it everywhere. Now I'm just going to put a little bit of colour into this lake. So I'm starting again with the raw sienna because I want to capture a lovely glowing reflection from that sun over there. And you can see all I'm doing here is again using that lovely flat edge of my brush to pull some reflections down into this very pale wash of raw sienna I'm putting on there, trying to make sure this top part is nice and wet because I want to pull some reflections down into this water here from the distant foliage. So I'm going to again just alternate between the burnt sienna and the Payne's grey where appropriate, and just pull some little gentle reflections down. Nothing needs to be too precise or too heavily detailed. You literally just want the colour poured into the water with these lovely sort of sweeping lines, just the hint of a reflection going into the lake. That's me just making sure I keep this paper nice and wet because of course another important touch here is the diffusion. I want these reflections to diffuse into the lake as well, where I've just put my raw sienna. I want it all to look lovely and soft. Obviously you can use any brush that you like for this, anything you find very comfortable to use. I'm just using my little mottler brush because I enjoy having that lovely flat edge to pull from. You can see I can just dot along. Basically it's very simple, just dot along that line, and the water does all the work for me really. It's very useful because I've got my board set at a slight angle. I'm hoping you can see that, but it's at a roughly 45-degree angle. So the water naturally wants to run down, which is why when I just put a little dot of paint onto this wet area here, it does naturally want to flow downwards. And now just to bring a little bit of extra colour and life to that water and reflect the beautiful sky we've got above there, I'm just sweeping in a little bit more ultramarine blue around here, just to give a little bit of extra nice bluey detail. This is also a snow scene, and for snow a really good way of showing detail is by using a cool blue such as ultramarine, which I'm using here, to just give the impression of stuffed up snow that's been sort of maybe layered over tufts of rock and grass, so you get those little dips and dimples and shadows where the light falls. Snow can be a bit tricky because obviously it's white, and how do you paint white onto white paper? But yes, a good shorthand for that is use a little bit of dry brush a little bit of blue there. You're painting the shadows rather than the snow itself, and then once you've put the shadows in, your eye will automatically see that and go, ah, snow. So to just give a little extra detail here, I'm dry brushing a little extra Payne's grey into this foreground, using the flat edge to just put in some detail around the lake shore, the impression of some rocks, perhaps a nice rocky shore, some little pebbles. The dry brushing is quite easy. You just need to make sure your brush isn't too heavily loaded with water and paint. You want it sort of a mid-damp, with enough paint to leave a mark obviously, but not so much that it starts to flood the paper. And now all I'm doing is going over this area here where you can see I've put some sort of stripes and dots and wiggles of masking fluid, just been a bit random here. This is going to be a sort of stepped rocky foreground, and to do this I'm putting in some Payne's grey over where this masking fluid is, because I know that as soon as I am able to peel off the masking fluid, it's going to give me this lovely white detail that's going to be in the middle of the grey, the blacky grey colour I'm putting on now. It's going to give me some lovely sharp clean edges, so I'm just pulling in a little bit of extra detail with this flat brush, putting some darts in at the foreground, and then I'm going to dry brush it down slightly, just to give the impression of the snow petering out just at these rocky edges. And here again you can see I'm using ultramarine blue to give a little extra dry brush detail here, just pulling it down from where I've got the rock detail already, just to give some more impression of the shadows on the snow. You can see I've added a little bit of extra detail in the foreground as well, those little sort of horizontal lines that I've done with the flat brush very easily there, just for some extra detail, a little bit of extra shadow, just for some interest in the foreground. You could of course leave it plain if that appeals to you more, Maybe I got a little bit a little bit happy with the brush, got a bit enthusiastic, but that's art for you. It's very easy to get carried away. And I quite liked how this looks. I liked the rocky lakeside. I liked the little rock details I've put into the actual lake itself. There you can see just some little dabs of black, just to keep it consistent. I say black, it's paint spray, but it looks black on the screen to me. So now that's dried, I'm ready to remove the masking fluid. You can see it comes away quite easily. You can just rub it with a finger, or you can use a normal rubber or eraser to just pull it off the paper without damaging anything. You must of course wait until your paint is completely dry before doing this, otherwise there is a risk of smudging or smearing the wet paint and getting it all over the place. So again, I dried this off with a hairdryer because I'm impatient like that. You can see this is how it looks once I've removed all the masking fluid. You see those lovely white trees waiting to be painted in. The white scratchy detail in the foreground boulders there. I'm really happy with how it's turned out. So all I'm doing now is going to put a little bit of detail into these trees. Because of the nature of silver birch trees, I want to keep as much of that lovely clean whiteness as possible, but also need to differentiate it out from the foreground and from the lakeside because the colours there are quite pale. So you can see I'm just going along with my flat brush and defining the edges, defining the branches carefully, and then I'm just going to go in and put a little bit of dry brush detail and some careful lines just to show where the bark is a little bit wrinkled and a little bit striped. If you've seen silver birches, you know they're lovely silvery birch gets these pretty sort of little horizontal lines on it. It looks a little bit like stripes. I'm also going to use the flat brush here just to put in a little bit of extra detail. Always like to put a little bit of extra shadow in around the base of the trees. And you can see I'm just marking out a little bit of foliage for later on as well. So you can see here just using the small flat brush to just dry brush in a little bit of detail. Again using Payne's Grey and a little ultramarine here, and just popping in those lines just to give a little detail and interest into this tree so that it's not just a big old flat line. The brushes I'm using for these are from a set that I got from Ken Bromley Art Supplies. They're just fairly basic watercolour flat brushes, synthetic. The ones I'm using are a size 0, this is this little one, and a size 4, the slightly larger one, but of course any brush will do. I'll pop a full list of my equipment and everything I'm using in the video description below if anybody is interested. But really, you know, as I always say, just use whatever you feel comfortable with, use whatever you have and whatever you like best. And as you can see, for the smaller branches, I'm just using this lovely flat brush to just go in and sketchily follow these lines of the branches. I'm doing them mostly filled in, but you can see if you look closely I'm leaving little white spaces just again for the impression of that lovely white silver birch bark. There we are, got the whole tree filled in now, and its brother. I must admit that's quite a laborious job. It did take quite a long time for me to get those filled in, so be prepared. If you do that, it will take you a wee while, which is why I sped it up, because I didn't think you wanted to sit there and watch me paint branches for an hour. So this is the brush I'm using now. This is a small Pro Art sword liner, I believe it's called. It's great fun to do these little wispy grasses and bits of foliage with. Of course, if you don't have one of those, just a simple thin round brush or a thin flat brush will do the job just as well. But this is my new brush and I'm really enjoying using it, so I'm showing it to you today. So all I'm going to do is just go around and pop a few lines in, just to pop a bit of foliage in anywhere I think it's needed, some on the rocks, some along the lakeshore, and I've gone over it with a combination of the burnt sienna and Payne's grey to give a little bit of extra detail there. Now you could certainly add more or less if you'd rather. You could even put some little reeds coming up from further inside the lake, which I didn't think of at the time, but now I think would look very pretty. And now all I'm doing is using my fine detail brush and some very light, some very weak paint to just add a little bit of foliage detail into those distant trees. I just want to give the impression of little husks of skeletons peeping through the foliage, just so it's not just a blur. There is a slight impression of detail, but also not wanting to do anything too dark or too sharp to take away from that lovely mistiness. And now, of course, for the finishing touches, a couple of bird silhouettes in that beautiful sky. The sharp-eyed ones amongst you might have noticed that I did try earlier putting in a couple of bird silhouettes with masking fluid. You'll be able to spot it right at the start of the video. It didn't really work out today. My sky wasn't dark enough for it to show up very cleanly when I rubbed it all off, so I decided to go over it in Payne's grey instead. But then that's painting, isn't it? Sometimes things work and sometimes things don't. We can always work around them and we can always have fun. So here we are with the finished painting. I'm really happy with how this turned out today, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching it too. I'm really pleased with those glorious colours. The sky turned out really well, I think, and the detail on the silver birches, whilst it did take me rather a long time to do, it was also really good fun. So I do hope you give this one a go, friends, because it is really very nice to do. Please let me know how you get on in the comments and whether you enjoyed this video. Please leave a like if you enjoyed it, and please consider checking out my Patreon page for more videos like this. And that's all from me today. I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video.